Yes.
Good timing, Feixiang. How are you?
Oh, it crashed several times. I don't know why, so I
That's
have to
okay.
restart it.
Just letting you know, I've just literally just made us live on YouTube, so your timing is impeccable. Thank you very much. And it's
Thank
4 o'clock, so we'll share slides. You're the last speaker, so we'll share slides with you once we're underway. But I'm about to go live, and so we'll get underway. Thank you very much.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Oh, hang on. Almost seamless. Just one sec. Got someone raising their hand. Okay. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 6 of the Indo-Pacific Series, Aerospace, Defence and Security Technology Market Trends, Opportunities between India, Australia and ASEAN. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor and Director for My Security Media, and we hold these series with our partners Aerospace and Defence Consultants Association of India and my co-host Raman Sapori in Delhi. Raman, thank you very much again. And we run this from Sydney as well. And this particular series, we have guests from Canada and also Singapore. Just going to walk through our introduction. We cover off on this series. This is a 10-part series, so we're just over halfway through now. We cover aerospace and space, defence and national security, cybersecurity and critical technology, and cities and infrastructure. These sessions are recorded and available on our YouTube channel. And we are streaming live on YouTube also. And I always forget to actually tweet that out. So if you want to, you can catch up at a later date on these sessions also. And for the audience, if you've got questions, you can raise your hand and post your questions on the chat as part of the GoToWebinar platform. On this particular episode, we have 4 guests in sort of a non-competing aspect. We've got Dr. Jonathan Goh, AI technologist for cybersecurity from ST Engineering in Singapore. Jonathan, thank you very much for joining us. We've got Srinivas Bhattiprolu, who is the Global Head Advanced Consulting Service with Nokia, also in Singapore. Srini, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Chris.
Andrew Ginter, I'm going to put you down as our special guest, Andrew. Andrew's staying up a bit late there in Canada, VP for Industrial Security from Waterfall Security Solutions. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Good, just checking you're awake because it's late there. I appreciate it. And Feixiang, Feixiang He, beg your pardon, Senior Threat Intelligence Analyst with Group IB in Singapore. Feixiang, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Look, it is going to be a very interesting session. We're going to be covering off on AI, 5G, OT cybersecurity, and also the threat landscape. So each of you will each be giving about a 10-minute presentation, and likewise with the audience, if you've got questions either per presentation or following, please get them ready and welcome to send them through early also. Last week's available now also on YouTube. We covered off on drones and anti-drone tech, and in particular definitely covered strong interest and sort of background as to the Indian sector and also a little bit from Israel. So a very interesting session. And the week before we covered off on space, in the space tech. And again, we had Japan, Australia and Indian perspectives on that particular episode. Happy birthday to Prime Minister Modi and our Prime Minister there. I thought I'd at least throw that in. Australia and India is certainly strengthening its relationship. And Narendra Modi there, happy birthday. And then from Raman, in terms of the corporatisation move of state-run arms maker in the India, Modi against workers. So there's a bit of dispute there from the workers. Raman, maybe just introduce us to this particular news and what it means for the Indian defence sector.
Uh, India got freedom in 1947. During the earlier British period, we had different parts of India working for the World War I and World War II. So we had the good old technologies of ordnance factory boards, which are government controlled, government funded. But today, as the new threat perceptions have come, Indian government has come out with different opportunities both for the government and private sector. The Ordnance Factory Board has got more than 4 dozen factories spread all over. They're making special clothing to arms and missiles. So the government wants to give them the same strength as the Indian private sector and also arrange foreign direct investments. That won't happen unless we have some cooperation between the Ordnance Factory Boards and otherwise also. We would like to have the best of technology at affordable cost. So today the government is moving forward to bring some corporatization and some best people who will lead the team, not people who have gone there. You have to prove your skills to get into that. So right now they are doing only maintenance and some kind of build to print and build to spec and maintenance. We want to have innovative capital invested in ordnance factories, and in the days to come, 41 factories under the Ordnance Factory Board would have a new look with the new thing. So it's a huge global opportunity to invest and be part of the new chain, supply chain emerging from India. Thank you, Chris.
Great. Thanks, Raman. Quite a big industry there, 4 billion US, I would understand. Some news out of Taiwan as well. Some aerial flights out from the PLA. Just something we're monitoring, but from week to week, what's happening in the South China Sea is certainly of interest. Some 12 fighters, 2 J-10 fighters, 2 J-11 fighters and 2 H-6 bombers and 1 Y-8 ASW crossed the midline, or what is termed the midline of the Taiwanese Strait, and some propaganda coming out from the Global Times. So again, interesting, and we're going to reach out to some colleagues in Japan and Taiwan over the next couple of weeks in relation to this, and some commentary around that. Japan and Australia have commenced joint exercises in the South China Sea, and again, something to be monitoring over the next couple of weeks. Some tech news, cloud computing revenue market share. China is taking the lead on that over the next, and certainly through to 2024. China, then Japan, India, and Australia. So China's got over a third of the cloud computing revenue. There was some other tech news from global data concerning India as well, but that's available on the MySecurity website. So that's pretty much news. I thought I'd keep it brief for this particular week. For the events, we are monitoring the 3D Printing World 2020, 5th and 6th of December. So again, building opportunities in the challenging times of the COVID pandemic. The top Women in Security Malaysia nominations will be closing next month, 23rd of October. And that's with the Malaysian Women in Security, with SECRA, ISACA Malaysia chapter and ASIS International chapter. The IBM Security Virtual Summit for the ASEAN region is also available. That's up on our channels now. So this is the on-demand version of this summit that was held earlier in September. The GSX, Global Security Exchange Plus, is currently on this week, normally held in the US. I think it might have been, well, it was Vegas last year. I can't remember where it was going to be this year, but we're partners in that, and you can get $50 off using the promo code EV154. So that's just hashtag GSX Plus. There's plenty on there. One of the largest security expos normally held in the US. And a couple of other events coming up end of September. Black Hat Asia is a virtual event this year, normally held in Singapore, September 29. And also this was an interesting one, our UK partners Net Events, September 30th, with Bob Metcalf, one of the original inventors of the Ethernet, from 2.9 megabits per second up to 800 gigabits. So we've come quite a long way, celebrating 40 years. So hopefully anyone who's been in the industry that long, you'll be starting to feel it by now. A couple of podcasts we dropped. In fact, I just did one today earlier with the Australian National University and University of Melbourne So that should be out tomorrow, but otherwise looking at Cisco systems. And Andrew, I imagine this touches on your topic on a conversation around cyber physical systems, and also Tim Watts, the Shadow Assistant Minister in Australia here for cybersecurity at the federal level. Cyber Power Index, Australia had dropped from, is 8th in terms of intent, and then it has now 16th in terms of its actual capability. So that's pretty much in terms of our week-to-week news. We're going to hand over to our panel. I introduced our panel earlier, Dr. Jonathan Goh from ST Engineering. Jonathan, I'm going to hand over to you. You should be the next slide, as I understand it. You're okay to go. Then we're going to hear from Srini at Nokia. Then we'll hear from Andrew at Waterfall. And then we'll finish off with Feixiang, I beg your pardon, with Group IB on the threat landscape. So hopefully you can all complement each other. So Jonathan, I have your slides. Just kind of indicate when you would like me to flip over. But if you're ready to go, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. It is my pleasure to speak at this webinar. So my name is Dr. Jonathan Goh. I am an AI technologist with ST Engineering Electronics. So the title of my talk is AI times Cyber Collaboration. And I'll be sharing about some of the challenges we face in cyber AI today and how we adopt a collaborative approach at ST Engineering to enable cyber AI. So the concept of applying AI to cybersecurity is not new. However, there's still a stigma to cyber AI. And here are the 4 main challenges that we currently face. On the accuracy issue, due to lack of data within the research labs, a lot of the AI models are developed using only a small subset of data. So when these models are actually deployed, they do not scale well to operational data, therefore providing poor accuracy. A lack of cyber use cases, the skill sets between a cyber expert and AI practitioners are different. So this may come to a situation where the cyber expert may not be aware of how AI can be developed to actually assist their day-to-day operations. On the other hand, AI practitioners do not also have the cyber expertise to produce good use cases. So both these cases lead to the lack of cyber use cases. A lack of trust. Due to the problems of accuracy, it is only natural that cyber analysts do not trust AI. So in addition, the cyber analysts do not have the what, the why, and the how about the algorithms being used. They also have no control over the algorithms, and they are unable to tweak the model for them to perform better. So lastly, the lack of AI infrastructure within a security environment. We need to understand that AI is not just an algorithm, but in order for AI to perform well, they actually need an ecosystem. And at the core of the ecosystem is the infrastructure. So the problem with majority of the AI infrastructure these days is that a lot of them are cloud-based, and they do not conform well to cybersecurity as we typically require an on-premise solution. So without the right infrastructure in place within the security environment, it also means that we lack the AI tools required by AI practitioners to access operational data and also to develop AI models. Next, Chris. So given this context, ST Engineering addresses these challenges by driving cyber AI across these 3 main areas: infrastructure, data science modeling, as well as managing AI operations. So for infrastructure, we understand that for cyber AI to be successful, we need an infrastructure that supports it. So this is why we are developing an on-premise end-to-end platform that is GPU-enabled to be placed within a security environment, such as SOC. This infrastructure is capable of performing data ingest to modeling and deployment of cyber AI models. The infrastructure also provides development environments for AI practitioners to do model training, and it also allows for AI practitioners to access operational data directly to create cyber AI opportunities. With the right infrastructure in place, it also provides the means for us to translate AI algorithms that we develop from within our research labs into operational environment. So on the modeling front, we understand that effective cyber defense with AI is not just built on data science skills alone. In fact, cyber tradecraft must be integrated with data science to build better solutions to better inform our cyber analysts. So that's why we collaborate very closely with cyber experts to identify use cases that are relevant to them in their daily operations. These use cases can be detector-based, or they can be use cases to reduce certain laborious tasks, such as analysis of reports, so on and so forth. So based on their need, we will then develop customized AI algorithms for them. We also work very closely with academia to be kept abreast about the current state of the art in AI and how they can actually be applied to cybersecurity. And because now the infrastructure is actually in place, and when we develop these algorithms, we can actually perform rapid testing of the algorithm within the operational environment. And we can reiterate the models until they're suitable for production. So on the topic of managing AI operations, in order for AI models to be useful, they need to be operationalized. So that's why we are also developing the platform to fully automate the operationalization of these models. Once a model has been deployed, the models are continuously monitored for model performance degradation. So when this happens, it really means that your environment has changed and that your models are no longer up to date. So it means that it's time to retrain the model. So we designed this process to be done with ease. Lastly, on the topic of governance, as society adopts AI models, we need to be kept aware that these models may need to be governed according to some regulations in future. Meaning to say we need to be accountable for these models. For example, when was the model last trained? What data was used to train the model? Who owns the data? Who deployed the model? So on and so forth. Next, please.
It's a good point there on the governance in case that environment changes on you. The AI is trained under a particular environment and that environment's changed. Can I just clarify, Jonathan, is this an internal research project or is this a product development project?
We are actually trying to operationalize AI for cybersecurity.
Within ST Engineering? Yeah.
Yes, because we see that we have a global shortage of cybersecurity professionals, and we think that AI can actually help to bridge the gap between that.
Great.
So what we did here is to introduce AI-enabled cybersecurity platform into the SOC that integrates well with security operations. As mentioned earlier, this platform supports a broad range of needs from data ingest to modeling to model deployment. And we developed it to be fully in line to the SOC. So that's why you see that there's no change to the data flow from your data sources to the SOC. The cybersecurity platform is also built on top of NVIDIA GPUs, and this serves two purposes here. So the first purpose is that it provides data science environment that enables AI training within the security environment. Secondly, it houses all the deployed AI models from the various use cases it was originally developed for. The outputs of the model would flow directly into your security appliance. And we emphasize here that the idea here is not to replace any security appliance, but rather to complement them using AI. So we're also designing feedback loops, and we know that, and the reason for that is because we know that AI models can actually make wrong predictions. So when that happens, we want the cyber analyst to be able to provide feedback to the model so that when the models are next trained, or rather next retrained, they will actually perform better. Chris, next slide, please.
Yep. I think you got a timer on these slides too, Jonathan, so that's why it just skipped over.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, could be.
Yeah.
With the infrastructure in place, we can now work together with cyber experts to curate cyber AI use cases. So there are four main stages to this workflow. At the ideation stage, we work together with the cyber analysts to come and understand what are their pain points and what their requirements are. The AI practitioner will then share the perspective on what can be done, what cannot be done, and then formulate the problem statement. At the second stage, on the data exploration stage, we assess the organization's data and determine what sort of data is available. The cyber expert will then provide their domain expertise on the data that can be used, and together with them, we will uncover new patterns of data to solve the problem. More importantly, we perform data collection at this stage to ensure that the data we collect here is accurate and of high quality for modeling. So at the modeling stage, we design and develop the best algorithm for the problem. As we develop the algorithm, we share with the expert, the cyber expert, why do we actually choose this algorithm, and we share with them how to train the model. So the purpose of this is, at the end of the day, they have the ability to tweak the model on their own, right? So once the model has been developed, we need to deploy the model. And because ultimately, the cyber analysts will be the ones using these AI models, so it is important that the outputs of these models integrates well with their tools. So that's why throughout the whole entire engagement with them, they work very closely with us to provide their opinions on their workflow. So we co-design how the outputs of the model can be integrated into operations such as to the scene. And we also design the feedback loop so that when feedback needs to be provided to the model, their workflow is not altered at all. Next. So one of the use cases for cyber AI.
That was me.
Sorry. One use case for cyber AI is in the area of malware detection. APTs, advanced persistent threats, are kind of sophisticated malware, and they typically stay dormant within their network. And once they're activated, this is when the malware actually call back to the malicious command control server to receive the instructions. The malware does this by generating a malicious domain using a domain generation algorithm, also known as a DGA, to hide the true location of the IP address to evade capture. So as they're always dormant in the network, the challenge the cyber expert gave to us was to detect them as soon as they make connection back to the C2 via the malicious domain name. So what we did here was to come up with a malicious domain name detector using DNS data, or rather DNS logs. After studying the malicious domain, we realized that as compared to legitimate domains such as google.com, malicious domains actually appear as a sequence of random alphabets. So as the domain names are essentially sequential data, what we did here was to use a time series neural network to build the detector. When we deployed the detector, we didn't want the model to send all the predictions to the SOC, as we didn't want the AI model to overwhelm the SOC analyst, defeating the purpose of AI altogether. So what we did was to create an intelligent security workflow, and based on the DNS detector's prediction, we wanted to augment it with EDR data to look for anomalies on the endpoint. Or can we actually use some form of AI? Can we actually develop some AI tools to process cyber threat intel information to look for reports that briefly describes the malware using such a DGA? And if these two technologies come back with supporting evidence, only then will we send the alert to the SOC. So by using the outputs of AI detectors intelligently, we have some advantages. Firstly, it allows the SOC to only receive true alerts, thus reducing false positives of the AI detectors. Secondly, it also presents the SOC analyst with all the necessary information to state why the alert was sent in the first place. Lastly, it also provides some sort of trust and explainability to the SOC with regards to the AI model's prediction. So this is an example of how AI can be applied to cyber to assist our defenders' day-to-day life. Next slide, Chris. So to conclude this presentation, infrastructure modeling and operationalization are integral to the success of not only cyber AI, but AI in general. Data science is a skill that needs to be applied to a domain. Therefore, collaboration is key to develop innovative AI-enabled cyber solutions to better inform our cyber defenders. With the right infrastructure in place, we can then enable cyber AI. Data is key. Again, with the infrastructure in place, we will be able to access them and be able to understand the data in order to create new cyber AI use cases. Lastly, AI is an ever-evolving field, so we need to work very closely with academia to continuously understand what's being developed in the AI field and how can we actually apply them to industrial applications. And with that, I've come to the end of my presentation. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Jonathan. Can I just clarify? You're an AI specialist rather than a cybersecurity specialist, so you're applying your knowledge in AI to a cybersecurity context, right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
My background was actually in the medical domain, so similarly, I applied my skills in AI to the medical domain. So now I'm applying it to the cyber.
Yeah. How are you finding the data sets to work with?
It's very diverse, to be very honest. It's your network data. If you're in the OT space, your network data looks totally different from the sensor data. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think the challenge is bringing it all together so you actually can understand what you're hearing. There's so many different logs, and as you say, different aspects coming into a SOC. The analysts are overwhelmed already. Look, thank you so much. I think we'll come back to you as well. It's certainly a fascinating area. Srini, I've got your slides now. If we hear from Nokia, and interesting, we'll apply, Jonathan just mentioned AI on networks. We're about to talk about the 5G networks. Over to you, beg your pardon, Srini, I'll go back. Over to you.
Thank you very much, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for joining this presentation. My presentation is all about 5G security, the recommendations and best practices. Next slide, please, Chris. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't be an understatement if I said the technology developments in the past 10 years have completely overshadowed the technology developments that have happened over the past century. So if you look at three aspects, which is technology, the attackers, and the threats, the technology landscape is ever expanding. You will see that today you've got close to 7 billion mobile subscribers across the globe. Come 2025, the prediction is that there will be 80 billion IoT devices. And Interpol in 2020 very clearly stated that any device that is likely to be connected to the internet has a potential of a risk for cyber attack. That's how grave the situation is, and that's how big the attack vectors are and threat landscape is. The other aspect which I would like to bring to your attention is, irrespective of what we do in terms of people, process, and technology, 95% of the incidents, the cyber incidents that are actually happening today, are happening primarily because of human error. So you see the importance. You could automate, you could do a lot of stuff to actually remove the human dependence, but eventually majority of the cyber incidents are actually being caused by the human interference. You will see that there's a lot of code that's being developed primarily for automation purposes. And then with these number of these huge lines, millions and billions of lines of code that is developed, the vulnerabilities are increasing in such an exponential manner you can't really imagine. Now, Jonathan talked about the use of AI in cybersecurity, and we are actually using artificial intelligence to protect our infrastructure. But guess what? Hacktivists or the attackers are also using artificial intelligence to actually make sure that they bring in new sets of malware. So there is serious amount of diversity in the malware, and you will see that close to 350 new malware samples are actually coming out on a daily basis. And then obviously there is automation that's happening in the mitigation mechanisms, but then there is automation that's happening in the malwares as well. So both the threat vectors, there is an increasing sophistication of all these threat vectors. Now, why am I telling you all these statistics? It's very, very important for you to take this in the context of 5G, because when 5G comes into the picture, next slide, please. In 5G, we're not just talking about gigabit speed and then sub 10 millisecond latency, or for that matter, hundreds of million devices of device density. We're talking about 5G addressing the critical infrastructure. Many governments have actually termed 5G or the telecom infrastructure per se as a critical infrastructure for every nation. And then with 5G coming into the picture, technology is actually making an entry into every walk of our life. Technology is entering our living rooms. Technology is entering our body even, by virtue of us actually becoming real subjects to 5G technology. So that's something which is very, very important. Critical infrastructure and protection of critical infrastructure is one of the most important aspects which is actually staring at us today. That is why governments have actually made a lot of important regulations. Australia in July 2020 have come up with a very comprehensive cybersecurity strategy, and which is actually sponsored by the Australian government himself. So has Singapore, and then Singapore actually gets the maximum visibility in terms of cyber threats. As of yesterday, I was reading in one of the newspapers that the banks in Singapore have actually handled transactions worth $5 billion, which are spurious in nature. So just imagine the amount of impact that these malwares and these cyber threats are causing. Now, the threat landscape is really evolving. We talked about that in more detail. There is a severe shortage of skills. And there's a severe shortage of skills on security. Come 5G security, there is even further shortage of skills. I will be talking about some metrics in my subsequent slides around what is the real shortage that we're talking about in terms of skills and capabilities. Now, what is also happening is it's not enough that the telcos are actually able to implement a robust 5G security infrastructure. They are actually looking towards suppliers like us and Nokia, or for that matter, any other network equipment provider or software vendors per se, and asking them what are the security measures that we are implementing to make sure that security is very much integrated into our day-to-day work. So how are we making sure that our suppliers are actually secure? How are we putting the right governance in place? How are we actually making sure that design for security concepts are included? Now, there are no standards there. It's only now that GSMA has come up with something called NESAS, which is also known as Network Element Security Assurance Scheme, which really looks at the process and the product and make sure if they are actually fit for purpose. So these are the 5 key drivers for 5G security that you got to really consider. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So today, if you were to take 4G security, or for that matter, even their predecessors, you have very clearly defined 3GPP mechanisms. You know what are the standards. All your crown jewels pretty much stay within the perimeter. You've got the secure gateways and the firewalls, which actually prevent any proliferation of data. You can prevent any attacks within the perimeter. And then you've got reactive operations, and the operations pretty much happen through silos. So there is a very clearly defined policies. Anything that is outside the perimeter is not something which is a concern. But what is really coming into the 5G realm is basically a very complex ecosystem with multiple stakeholders, which means flexibility is going to be the order of day. Scalability is going to be the order of day. In 4G or even its in predecessors, we had network which is represented in the form of appliances, but that's not the case anymore. Software has proliferated into the network. Today, we are actually talking about NFV, or network function virtualization, which is actually the key for any operator to actually start considering 5G as their as their infrastructure. You got to really have the right level of flexibility. Last but not the least, 5G is entering our human lives. Just imagine a surgery being conducted, folks, and then a cyber attack happening, and then the surgery not getting completed. So that's how much a big impact the cybersecurity is going to have on the 5G infrastructure. Can you please build it, Chris? Next slide, please. Can you please click next, Chris?
Here you go. Sorry.
So you will see that there are a lot of punitive measures that different governments have come up with, and then this is something which is extremely important. Organizations are going to lose billions if they really don't take into account the cybersecurity principles and standards. Jonathan talked about this. There are close to 1.8 million shortage that we're going to have by 2022. This is something which Forrester is saying. And then there are too many tools today. There's no one tool that can really say that, yes, we're going to address every tenet of cybersecurity. Next slide, please. So in terms of a cybersecurity architecture, we're talking about 5 verticals, which are basically the 5 real domains, and then 3 horizontals. The 5 verticals are the devices, the access or the radio sites, the edge sites, and the central sites. And obviously, there is transport, which is connecting them all. You've actually got standards like 3GPP. For example, radio security standards are defined by the 3GPP standard TS33.501, which is pretty much a very clear standard, which talks about the G Node B security and other secure aspects. There is obviously a 5G core security, which is defined by the 3GPP standard as well. And transport security to an extent is actually covered by the IETF standards. But then if you're talking about the IoT security, the device security, there is no standard that's existing today, because devices are omnipresent and every vendor has their own very specific standards across manufacturing devices. And how do we really embed device security into these devices? And so is the case with telco cloud security. And we talked about the NFV. As horizontals, we've got the end-to-end security operations. Again, there is no specific standard. There is huge amount of automation that's being brought in. And slicing security is the new concept, which is almost tantamount to virtualizing the network functions, or virtualizing the network capabilities to meet specific QoS or SLAs. That's what you're talking about. And obviously, the design for security is one of the most important aspects that the vendors have to consider. Next slide, please. In terms of our recommendations, I will not go through everything, but I'll cover a few of those. There is a need for a holistic approach. Security is not just a technology issue. You got to really look at security across people, process, and technology, all 3. We talked about the coexistence of solutions. Today, there is no one vendor who will be providing end-to-end security capabilities. Operators will have to really look at coexistence of solutions and how do we really integrate these. This becomes imperative that operators build their own security capability, especially in the area of 5G security. Advanced technologies, advanced analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence are stuff that operators will have to really build capabilities on, because the threat vectors are, the level of sophistication across these threat vectors is growing, and so has to be the safeguards. there is a clear need of an ecosystem for sharing, whether it is vendors, whether it is operators. There is the attackers are actually becoming very intelligent. So there is a very clear need and a purpose for the ecosystem of sharing. And then the right level of sharing has to happen between the different stakeholders in security. And last but not the least, the 5G security operations, because of the huge growth in the devices that we're going to have, there is no way that you could have manual operations. So you got to bring in concepts like SOAR, security orchestration, automation, and response. You have to adapt to those to make sure that your operations are secure. So these are some of the recommendations. It's a huge topic, cannot be covered in 10 minutes. I hope I actually tried putting in the right messages.
No, you did quite well there, though, Srini. There was a concept, you mentioned the Australian cybersecurity strategy, and in that concept, I think it's coming out of Telstra, is the clean pipes approach. Where would you see that? I mean, how much can be done at the network layer to clean most of these threats out?
Yep. Very, very good point. Telstra, in May 2019, they have launched this new concept of a clean pipe, and they have been kind of piloting this for almost a year now. The idea is to actually free the network from any kind of malwares, any kind of other aspects. Now, the problem with 5G and the aspect that needs to be considered is you really cannot have agent-based security systems. So you got to make sure that you have agent-less solutions that are available within the network who are actually utilizing aspects like anomaly detection to make sure that the malware incidence is protected and even prevented for that matter. So there is a preventative measure that Telstra has employed, and there is a protective measure that you got to employ as well. In fact, in the recent attack that we have had, Telstra's network was the least affected, and it happened primarily because of all the safeguards that Telstra has put in place. So that's something which you could look at as well.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. And for the audience, those slides are available for immediate download off the platform. And I believe the other slides will be available for download following. And speaking of that, we're going to hand over to Andrew Ginter, who's been waiting patiently there. And for Waterfall Security Solutions, most of us would be aware of Waterfall. So it's a pleasure to have you on, Andrew. I think we might have even had Waterfall advertised with us in the past. So it's always good to have you back on. I'm going to hand over to you and just kind of let me know when you'd like me to forward on the slides. So Andrew Ginter, VP Security Solutions.
Sure thing. Thank you, Chris. So I'm going to be speaking to OT security, the security of industrial sites, power plants, refineries, water purification systems, this sort of thing. And I'm going to be speaking to a handful of new approaches that have come out in the last 24 months for OT security. If you could advance, please. And what we see in the OT security space is that a lot of industrial enterprises have focused their security programs on the low end of the threat spectrum. They worry about high frequency, low impact attacks. I mean, imagine a power distribution company for a city. They will focus on stealing power from smart meters. What's the impact if one of these attacks happens? It might be, 100, it might be 500 rupees in a month. How often do they happen? Well, too often. So we see the security focused on there, and we see an assumption that on the high end of the spectrum, where the nation states get involved, that the government will somehow protect us. This will not work for us going forward. The organized crime, targeted ransomware, today is using the same attack techniques that we saw nation states using 5 years ago. The spectrum, the threat environment has become much worse in the last 5 years. The governments do work to save us, but the techniques they have work on only certain kinds of attacks. They use information sharing. They use classified threat briefings. They might even use central security monitoring. They might have, incident response teams that can come out. These approaches are good. They're worthwhile. but they cannot act fast enough to defeat certain very fast-moving attacks. The individual industrial sites must defend against those attacks themselves, or there's no defense. So if you could advance, please. The good news is that in the last 24 months, there are 3 new approaches to industrial cybersecurity, to OT security, that have come forward. This is a book from the ISA, the International Society of Automation. It's called Security Process Hazard Assessment or Analysis Review, Security PHA Review. PHA is a process that's used for safety systems. The folks at Connexus wrote this book. They've done safety systems for a very long time. And what they do is they say, look, you've already done the analysis for the worst possible consequences of cyber compromise. The worst consequences are explosions or environmental disasters. These are safety consequences. They say, take your safety analysis, add an extra column or 3 to the spreadsheet, and ask the question, is the incident causable? Is this safety incident, can the condition be triggered by cyber means? And more importantly, if it's triggered by any means, is it computers that are protecting us from the consequences? Or is there some other kind of protection? If there is, if both the cause and the correction are both hackable, we have a problem. Now you can cause truly unacceptable consequences with cyber means. And so what they recommend is that when you see one of those, wherever practical, deploy additional physical mitigations. So imagine an overpressure valve on a boiler. If you have a boiler as big as a small skyscraper, this is a large coal-fired power plant, and the boiler overpressures, there's an explosion, people nearby die, the lights go out. This is all very bad. But if you have a simple spring-loaded valve so that when the pressure in the boiler gets too high, it forces the valve open, and now the steam can escape, and the boiler cannot overpressure. That's physical mitigation for the safety consequence. It does not matter how sophisticated the cyber attack is if it's not physically possible to cause the boiler to explode anymore. So this is Security PHA Review. It talks about physical mitigation for safety incidents that might be caused by cyber attacks. If you could advance, please. The second book that everyone's been talking about for about 24 months has not yet been published. This is a brand new methodology coming from Idaho National Labs. Andrew Bachman is the author. He's expecting that this will be actually published in the next month or two, before the end of calendar 2020. That's the bad news, is that you can't see this yet, unless you've been at the conferences where it's been described. The good news is that Andrew was a guest on the Industrial Security podcast just a couple of months ago. The podcast is free. Google Industrial Security Podcast and you'll find it. Scroll through till you find Andrew Bachman talking about CCE. CCE is consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering. It talks, it overlaps with the Security PHA Review in the sense that they both talk about safety consequences and physical mitigation for safety consequences. But CCE goes further. CCE says, look, the reason, safety is a huge priority at industrial sites, but the second priority at all industrial sites is reliability. Keep the lights on, keep gasoline coming out of the refinery, keep clean water in our drinking water system. And so they include a discussion of physical mitigation for cyber incidents that impact reliability. They expand the scope of the Security PHA to include reliability. And they point out that when it's not possible to have a physical mitigation for one of these attacks, then you have to do the software thing. And the software thing is difficult. And they describe a thorough and costly, expensive approach to dealing with software threats. They talk about inventorying all of the assets that need to be protected, inventorying all of the software on those assets, inventorying all of the communications between all of those assets, and creating a map of all the possible attack vectors, all the possible ways that attacks can reach into those software protected assets. The bad news is that this comprehensive catalog of attacks can be very large. I saw an attack tree done for a power plant a couple of years ago. They turned up 1.2 billion, 1.2 times 10 to the 9th attack paths that had to be mitigated to protect that power plant. Next slide, please.
Wouldn't that be something?
So that brings us to the third.
Beg your pardon. I was going to say that's something that the bad guys are doing as well at the other end, in terms of mapping out the attack vectors as well. That's possible, right? So it's got to be done
Absolutely.
at the right
And
side.
I'm one of the co-hosts on the Industrial Security podcast. We had a guest from EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute. His take on understanding your system, understanding what you have, understanding the software, understanding how it communicates. His take was the only hope we have of protecting against these sophisticated adversaries is if we understand our systems better than they do.
Yep. Which
if
is
they
often not
understand
the
them
case.
better, we're in trouble.
Okay, next one.
Yes. So the next one is Secure Operations Technology. This is my book from 18 months ago. I wrote a book because what I saw the world's most secure industrial sites doing is different from what I saw everybody else doing. And nobody was talking about the difference. So this book documents what the world's most secure industrial sites do differently. And one of the key differences is, regular industrial sites, IT sites, everyone in the computer industry talks about protecting the information. And what we saw the world's most secure sites doing was not protecting the information. The job is not to prevent someone from stealing the temperature on the boiler on a steam-fired power plant. What we saw them doing was protecting physical operations. The priority is safe, correct, continuous, and efficient physical operations. That's the priority at these sites, not protecting the information. In fact, these sites need to protect all of the physical operation from information because all cyber attacks are information. Every flow of information can encode an attack. So one of the things we saw these sites doing differently was producing an inventory, not of all their assets. They do that as well. What they do is they take a shortcut. Instead of finding the 1.2 billion attack paths, they inventory all of the ways that information can flow into a network. There's usually only a couple of dozen. Every information flow is a possible attack. A comprehensive inventory of information flows is also a comprehensive inventory of attack vectors. Control every one of those information flows, and we've protected the plant. Next slide, please. And, some of the ways that we control the information flows are not surprising. Put a removable media program in place. Stop using USB drives so much. Stop people carrying laptops into the site that have been connecting to the hotel entertainment network an hour earlier. The surprising thing that we see these people doing is using unidirectional security gateway technology to protect online information flows. So the technology, if you're not familiar with it, it's a piece of hardware at the center of the diagram that can physically send information in only one direction. It's not physically possible to bring anything back. The software, there is software involved on either side. The software makes copies of servers. So imagine you have a database, a SQL Server database on the industrial network that has all of the good information that needs to be shared with the business in order to run the business efficiently. Remember, efficiency is one of the priorities. What the software does is gathers all the data, converts it to the weird one-way formats, pushes it through the hardware, and on the other side populates an identical SQL server. Now anyone on the outside network can ask the copy of the database for information and gets the same answer as the live system would have given without ever sending a single bit of information back into the network to potentially put operations at risk. Next slide, please. So One example of this, I mean, the obvious example, the sort of the easy example is IT/OT integration. You put this device at the interface to the IT network. Now operations is independent of the IT network, but the IT network can still monitor operations. I wanted to give you a slightly more interesting example, a sort of a less common example. But let's say again, I'm familiar with a lot of power plants. Let's say in a power plant, we have protective relays. These are computers that prevent damage to equipment. But these are computers, okay? So SPR, doesn't work because intrinsically what we're trying to protect here is computers. CCE says we have to protect them because they're the ones that assure continuous operation, but they're computers. SecOT says, what information flows do we have into these relays? Nothing. What comes out of the relays? Well, we want to monitor them so that if they fail, we can replace them because these are the equipment that's protecting our billion-dollar plant. So put a unidirectional gateway in front of the relay network if we, for whatever reason, don't want to put a gateway in front of the IT/OT interface, and we're good. Next slide, please. So these are some frequently asked questions. You folks have access to the PDF afterwards. Hopefully these will answer some of your questions. And the last slide, please.
These are available as well, aren't they, Andrew? We'll have them for download.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Just a word about Waterfall, if you'll indulge me. We are the OT security company. We serve the world's most secure sites. We're the leading producer of this unidirectional technology. We invented this technology. We have the patents to show you. We've been around for 13 years. And this is what we do. We serve the world's most secure industrial sites, and we work with industrial enterprises to join the ranks of the world's most secure. That's what I have for you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Andrew. I noticed you did was it a podcast you did with Daniel Ehrenreich the other day?
Yes, indeed.
I did Daniel's course last week. We had him in Sydney and Perth for his ICS cybersecurity workshop. So very worthwhile. Cool. And if you can send through a link to your podcast show, we'll get that onto the marketplace and put it onto the show notes as well.
I will do that.
Thank you very much. Andrew, you don't feel obliged to stay on with us. I don't have any formal questions from the audience, but to head off if you feel the need. But thank you very much for that.
I'll stay with you another few minutes.
Good man. Thank you very much. And Feixiang, am I saying your name correctly?
Yes,
with an Australian accent?
It's all right.
Good man. Okay, we're going to hand over to you. We're going to do a swap. Just 1 second. And you'll get a prompt on your screen, Feixiang, and we're going to talk about the threat landscape, so a good segue.
Chris, before Andrew goes off screen, I had a question for the panelists.
Yep, go.
Gentlemen, the question is, while we are driving on the road, I take insurance policy for my life and for my car. If I'm driving on the, information broadband, where my information is flowing, what kind of insurance assurance do you give to me? I am willing to take that insurance policy. And how much I have to pay for that? If I'm investing, let's say, $1 million, what kind of insurance policy will you give me that there's no threat to my life or my information? Any broad thoughts? Is there anyone who gives insurance against the cyber attacks? Yes or no? If yes, how much we have to pay? What percentage of the critical infrastructure I should spend to get that insurance assurance from that? One of you can answer.
So let me take a quick partial answer. Waterfall does not offer insurance. We're partnered with insurers. We're partnered with Lloyd's of London. They give discounts to the world's most secure sites because of the robust unidirectional protections they've deployed. But let me add, insurance is not always the answer. The insurance is the answer for certain kinds of businesses. If we're building washing machines and we're down for a month, insurance could cover that. You have to be careful because there are now standard exclusions in most policies preventing coverage for cyber incidents. Or if there's coverage for cyber incidents, there's no coverage for terrorist attacks or nation state attacks. And the problem is that we're seeing a lot of these. For instance, the big NotPetya attack that took down Maersk for most of a week, took down the world's largest container shipping entity, company, for most of a week. Far as I know, they did not get coverage from their insurer because it was the Russians who triggered it, and it was flagged as a nation-state attack. So you got to be careful with insurance. You won't always get covered. And B, it might work for a washing machine factory. It's not going to work for a power company. I mean, imagine that the lights go out across half the continent for a week because of a cyber attack. And after a week, finally, the lights come back on, and the CEO of the power company that got hacked, that triggered the whole massive blackout, comes on the television and says, I'm very sorry. I need the people of this great nation to understand that throughout this horrible episode, we did not lose one penny because we have insurance. That's the wrong answer.
Yeah.
He would be lynched. Okay. When you have critical infrastructures, insurance protects the business, does not protect society. And there's an expectation that critical infrastructures are protected enough to protect society from the worst consequences of attack. So insurance is the right answer only some of the time.
And Feixiang, we might hand over to you, because I imagine you're in this space in terms of insurance and what insurance can touch on. So over to you.
Exactly. I actually add to my last slides about quantifying something. The problem with the insurance, let me just say something about that first. The problem with insurance that the existing insurance model are built on quantified statistics. But the problem with data loss, sometimes it's very hard to put a value on it. If my data gets put on the dark web, it probably just maybe $1 or $2. If it is a Ministry of Singapore, it can be 1 million or even more. And in our perspective, we are trying to find a balance. How can we find the proper way to do the standard deviation, and where should we look into that? But yeah, again, thanks for having me. I would really appreciate you actually put Andrew in front of me, because he actually brought up some interesting point that I would like to emphasize. First of all, I would say in the current threat landscape, we have observed that there are a lot of specialization in the threat actors domain. Previously, as Andrew pointed out, certain weaponaries were only available for state-sponsored actors. But now, with the greater specialization, we have been seeing that there are malware developers that specifically looking into the cyber weaponry development, and they will hand it over to the shadow brokers to sell it. And we see people has relatively low technical skill set, but is good at operational stuff. They buy the weaponaries and they run the show. So today's theme, I would say that there are three keywords for my presentation: monetization, how the threat actors are focusing on getting the money out of the operations, and specialization, and X as a service. It includes hacking as a service, ransomware as a service. So let us begin. Well, first of all, please allow me to quickly introduce Group IB and myself. Group IB is a Singapore-based provider of solutions that aim at the detection and the prevention of cyber attacks and online frauds. Our humble journey started in 2003. We were proud partner of Interpol, Europol, and many domestic law enforcement in various Asian countries. My cyber threat intelligence unit focuses on tracing cyber criminals' activities, understand the latest techniques, tactics, and procedures adopted by the hacking groups, and also monitoring the illicit cyber trading activities. In the current situation, the Cyber Threat Intelligence Service role is essentially to provide early warning to the defensive side, to help defenders decide where they should plan and spend defensive resources, to spot a weakness in the defense deployment architecture, and finally, to find out the breaches that were not detected by existing defensive resources. I myself am specialized in malware research and largely focus on Asian country-specific threat intelligence operations. Well, in the past 8.5 months of 2020, we have observed that the cyber criminal activities have been increasing with a very unique taste of remote work theme, with an increasingly focus on social engineering tactics, and more threat actors are financially driven. When it comes to the remote work theme, it is unsurprising because given the current COVID-19 situation, when we talk about remote work theme attack, that includes the attack on the remote collaboration tools, corporate VPN networks, and also the exposed remote desktop access to your corporate intranet. And last but not least, the business theme phishing attacks. And the second point, as Andrew pointed out, ransomware nowadays has become a problem. And from our observation, the ransom hackers are increasingly noisy. In the past, when the corporate was attacked by ransomware, the ransom demander actually trying to establish a private conversation with the victim organization. But nowadays, we've seen a lot of new threat actor groups. They publicly pronounce who has been hacked and what are the amount of money they are demand. And if the deadline is breached, the data will be released either in the clearnet or in the darknet. It creates a new class of panic when it comes to victim negotiation or sometimes salvage of encrypted data. And like I mentioned before, the cyber criminals nowadays are very specialized. And when it comes to put up a hacking teams, many of the threat actors are rely on the ad hoc build up of a team. For example, a threat actor group leader might be post on the dark web forum saying, hey, I need someone who are specialized infiltrating Windows server. And I also need someone to carry out my money laundry in country, maybe in Pakistan, India, or in other ASEAN countries as well. And further on, we have observed the rise of hacking as a service. One of the prominent hacking as a service is specifically emphasized on ransomware as a service. So as long as you have a Bitcoin wallet and you are willing to pay for the maintenance fee, for the upgrade fee, you will be able to get a web dashboard and a direct way to implant a ransomware to your target. All you need to do is to understand who your target is. Are there any vulnerabilities to initiate the first line of infiltration? And how can you implant such a ransomware? And after the ransomware is implanted, you don't need to care about it. Your dashboard will take care of when to designate it, when to blow up the target server, and when to demand the ransom, and how to do monetary laundry. They're all being taken care as part of the as a service package. It is very convenient, and that's why we have seen a lot of everyday Joes who doesn't really fit into the hackers' profiles, but still are able to carry out some very interesting or devastating attacks on a fully defended corporate environment. And now let's take a quick dive into the financial sectors. Increasingly, the social engineering-oriented attacks against banking employees has been reported in the first 3 quarters of 2020. We've seen things like business theme email, phishing email to trying to gain a foothold by infiltrating Office 365 infrastructure of the corporate environment. And we all seen that it can happen in maybe as innocent as just leading the victim to the phishing website, or it can be more advanced tactics such as zero-click malware and so on. And we also observed from a personal point of view, the Android banking malware has made a comeback. In 2019, we actually see that with the progress of Android operating system and also the efforts Google put in, the Android banking malware was stopped for a short period of time. But when it comes to the 2020, there are rising trends in that territory. And when it comes to banking malware targeted individual users, We have seen Australia become one of the frequent victims on the list, and majority of the attacks was initiated via the desktop malware. However, compared to that, Malaysia and Vietnam has seen a lot of cases that initiate from the mobile end banking malware attacks. And last but not least, yet again, we see more and more phishing campaigns that are on the rise, specifically targeting at regional financial centers such as Hong Kong and Singapore. And now let's talk about some numbers. Let's switch from an enterprise view to a personal victim point of view. As I mentioned before, hackers are increasingly financial driven. So getting a hold on personal credit card is one of the quickest way for profiteering, money laundering, or maybe as simple as build up anonymity in a dark web by making the financial payment using the stolen cards. We have observed that for the dumps, by the way, the dumps credit card is basically referring to the illegal data that collecting from your credit card magnetic strip that requires the threat actors has the physical access to your credit card, maybe through a POS machine malware. We have observed around 400,000 cards that put up on sale, and total worth about 21 million US dollars. And the second category is basically a text information of your credit card. It includes your credit card number, a holder's name, expiration date, and CVV 3-digit. And we have observed around 1.2 million cards that worth of total 33 million US dollars put on sale in the dark web markets. And then it comes to the ransomware. Ransomware, a very low-skill barrier attack, brutal yet very effective. When it comes to 2020, this class of cyber attacks become very prominent. We have heard a lot of cases just in the 3 quarters in 2020. For example, the review against the United States law firm that located in New York, allegedly U.S. President Donald Trump was one of the clients for that law firm. And we also see a snake attack against Honda, one of the Japanese automakers, and also Maze attack against ST Engineering, our brother from Singapore, but against their U.S. subsidiary, and as well as against the same group against LG Electronics. And like I mentioned before, nowadays the ransom notes are become increasingly public. For example, the Maze Group has a well-maintained darknet website that frequently posting who is the recent victim and how much they demand and when is the deadline and what if the deadline is missed. Usually, such kind of ransom attack can result in 2 ways. One is victim's financial loss, or 2, the data is leaked.
That's how you can tell whether they paid the ransom or not, isn't it? When their data gets released, you go, okay, they didn't pay.
Yes. So either way, the ransom attackers can get the profit, whether by selling the stolen data or get the ransom.
Any insights that you might have as to how many might actually be paying compared to those that aren't?
It's quite sensitive information. I wouldn't say the numbers, but I would say that quite number of victims are willing to pay because nowadays the ransomware are very advanced. Certain ransomware actually destroy the warm or even hot data backup unless you have a cold data backup that is fairly free recently. And one of the things that I can talk about is Garmin. They actually paid the ransom with quite an amount of money, and it was publicly disclosed, and that's how I could talk about it. Usually, I would say ransom amounts are being negotiated, not the original price. But yeah, like I said, quite a number of victims are willing to pay, and that comes back to the cybersecurity insurance. I believe that the ransomware is also part of the coverage in certain category of cyber insurance. So that is where I personally believe the insurance could serve the purpose. I'm not saying selling the insurance. I have no association with insurance. It's just my own opinion.
But it's an interesting area in terms of if the insurers are saying, look, we'll only insure you for the ransom, a bit like, you know, the old kidnap and ransom kind of policy that they used to have, where they'll cover the actual ransom payment. It only inspires the attackers to go, okay, well, we hear you've got insurance, so you're going to have to pay, and we'll deal with your insurer. So it's a very interesting scenario that's emerging in this environment.
It is, exactly. So yeah, let me just quickly wrap up my presentation. Yeah. So I'm showing the government sectors, the allegedly APTs. I wouldn't say it's a concrete science. There are circumstantial evidence to pointing each of the threat actors to a specific country. My point is, cybersecurity topics nowadays are increasingly politicized. I have to admit, cybersecurity is inherently political, but as a security research organization or defensive side, I hope my fellow vendors and researchers should focus on the facts itself, because from a private sector point of view, it doesn't make sense to understand who is behind, but it does make sense to understand who, when, and what and how. What and how is more important than who, as far as my concern. And this slide is also cover the three most prominent APT group that has a major operation that discovered and reported in the public domain in the past 3 quarters in 2020. Lazarus is allegedly belong to North Korea. They are largely financial driven because allegedly they won for US dollars in most of the cyber incidents. And also we see one of the lone remaining undetected group that has been discovered recently, namely Larry Turtle. This group has a very advanced cyber weaponries that leverage some undisclosed zero-day vulnerabilities previously. And that is one of the reasons we believe the group can remain undetected for almost 3 years. And last but not least, I would say cyber threat is not always coming from the external world. The mistakes that defensive side made in 2020 inflicts quite a big damage on top of the traditional cyber threats. The data leaks are caused by the mistakes listed here, but they were harvested by threat actors or opportunists. There are a lot of threat actors nowadays that are constantly scanning the internet, looking for open port, for example, for the open Elasticsearch database. Here I just listed several examples how badly it can go when your own database was misconfigured, or you have a out-of-date online portal, or as simple as you have a management issue so that the insider threat become a problematic site.
Yep.
Right, that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, well done. I think that I noticed you had Mustang Panda up there, and we just did a podcast about Mustang Panda, so otherwise Red Delta with the Recorded Future Group. Now, I should be able to either take back control. We don't have any particular questions. Rahman, have you any particular questions of the panel before we close it off? We're going just over time.
No, perfectly fine. I'll have specific questions to each of the panelists, which I'll send in a mail. But just a thought that people are talking of dark web, and people also talk of the state and the non-state actors. So the experience where, the non-state actors, what as a world, United Nations, we should do against people who are making cyber threat as a business against nations or corporates. What is the United Nations, issue on this? Is there any there are issues on weapons of mass destruction, and cyber threat itself is a weapon of mass destruction. I'm just putting it food for thought.
They are potentially working on a set of guidelines, but they're always guidelines, Rahman, unfortunately, coming out of the bodies like the UN. But yeah, definitely something coming out I think Australia is trying to lead the way in that engagement also. Something from Australia is they're updating the Australian Cyber and Critical Technology International Engagement Strategy. So I think it was something we slightly covered off on our coverage with the Israel Cybersecurity Directorate also. So they are kind of working on it, but in terms of this particular domain, you've obviously got foreign state actors that don't want to abide by the law anyway, or by the rules. So look, and this might be something we touch on next week under the National Security and Defence domain. So on that particular note, we've gone just over our hour. So look, thank you so much to our panel. Each of those sessions really had a lot of insight, and it just shows you the challenges that we actually have across the cybersecurity domain. I thank you. The actual topic today was collaboration, and I think you can see across the networks, across the threat landscape, across the OT security environment, and also the uptakes of AI, you can see collaboration is required. And so I thank all of you for your time and sharing your insights today. So it's very, very useful. We heard from Jonathan Goh, AI technologist in the cybersecurity realm for ST Engineering in Singapore. Srinivas Bhattiprolu, the global head for advanced consulting service Nokia in Singapore. And Srinivas, we might cover off on the Australian cybersecurity strategy eventually as well. I know that you've been looking at that. Andrew Ginter there in Canada, VP Industrial Security for Waterfall Security Solutions. An absolute pleasure to have your insight. And Feixiang He, the Senior Threat Intelligence Analyst at Group IB in Singapore. Thank you so much for your time. Just to close off, if this thing works, next week we don't have our panel finalised. We will, I'm just reaching out to I better get their name right, the International Security Industry Council with Japan. We're going to get at least their insights in terms of what that council is doing. And it's something that we might be working on soon with the Quad, the India, Japan, Australia and US. And obviously we'll keep Singapore and ASEAN nations involved with that. So look, thank you so much. We'll close it off here. These sessions are available on My Security TV. All of the panel all of the panel presentations will be available for download on the show notes. And gents, if you don't mind, send through any other links that we covered off on today in your email to me, and we'll put them in the show notes as well for additional downloads, particularly the podcast show and the books as well, Andrew. So thank you. So thank you very much, Rahman. We'll see you next week, and appreciate you joining us for the Indo-Pacific Series.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Pleasure meeting you.
Pleasure.